What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to discuss FPL team formations. Which one might be the best one? What are the pros and cons between different styles? And ultimately, why we should probably start thinking of formations as a bit more fluid than we currently do, where we have to be set with one formation and one formation only. So I'm going to discuss all that in this video. If you enjoy it, give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here as well. One thing I want to talk about before we jump into it is Fantasy Football Scout. If you've not already checked them out, there is a link in the description below so you can become a member. There are a hell of a lot of tools here. There's stats tables that you can make your own, season tickers, transfer planners, members only videos. There's a ton of stuff in here. One thing that I found useful in particular when making my squad is looking at potential rotation and stuff like that. Who's got the best fixtures? So in the season ticker, which I've already clicked onto here, this is it. You can look as far ahead as you want to. So I've got it set to 10 weeks, but you can come down here and make it more if you want, up to like 14 weeks in advance, or you can make it shorter. Now, at the start of the season, I tend to look a little bit shorter. So we've got 6 game weeks on there now. That's probably all we need. And if you come to the bottom, you can sort by difficulty, which will show you who the best fixtures are. But one thing I really like, let's say a lot of you are looking at Tomiyasu and you want another 4.5 million defender to rotate. You can click on Arsenal. Obviously, that's who Tomiyasu plays for. And then you can scroll down and you can click on rotation. And when you do that, it will show you the teams that rotate the best, right? So you can see here when Arsenal have got Man United, for example, in game week 6, where you might not want to play Tomiyasu, Wolves have got Southampton at home. So someone like Johnny, as long as he's still starting and fit and there's no competition or anything like that, could be a decent option. Similarly, if you wanted to play Johnny most weeks, but he's got Spurs away in game week 3, you could play Tomiyasu in game week 3 instead against Bournemouth. So you can do that for any team, right? So if you want to find a player that rotates with Newcastle, you just click on that and that will show you some of the best results as well. So there's loads of great tools in there. If you want to become a member, which I'd highly recommend, link in the description below, get signed up for the season. You can pay monthly or you can do it as a season-long payment as well. So I wanted to go through some of the talking points first of all, which I think will answer some of the questions that I get about formations. There's going to be some crossover in this video towards squad building as well, how to structure pros and cons and stuff like that, but hopefully it's useful for you, right? So as we know, some of the best value is in the 5.5 to 7.5 million bracket, especially defense, i.e. big at the back. So there will undoubtedly be some value in the 5.5 to 7.5 million midfielders and forwards. Even if we don't know who they are right now, who they're definitely going to be, they will show themselves as the season goes on. But I think if you ask me to pick a bunch of players in that price range, I would veer towards defenders for more guaranteed points at the start of the season. The flip side is I've put some of the best value, but really all of the best value £4.5 million picks are defenders, right? Because we know midfielders and forwards, there are players in that price bracket, but usually the most you get is the odd return every now and then. I'm talking like every 10 to 15 game weeks and appearance points. And that's usually about it, unless something changes this season. So obviously you've got like Andreas Pereira, De Silva at Brentford, players like that people are looking at. But ultimately, most of the 4.5 million value will be in defence. So if you fill your team up with really expensive defenders, you do miss out on some of that value. And that can help, which we'll come on to later on when I talk about the classic 3-4-3 draft. One thing to mention, I wouldn't get too strung up or stressed about exactly how the formation looks, because the World Cup is going to bring us unlimited transfers. So usually you have one wild card for the first half of the season, one wild card for the second half. And so if you use your first one very early, like game week 5 or 6, and then you want to save your other one to like game week 30, 31, 32, that's a long time without a wild card. But this year, in the middle of the season when the World Cup is on, we're going to get unlimited transfers. So essentially we have a third wild card. We just can't choose when to use it. We have to use it before that Boxing Day deadline. But because of that, a lot of people are going to use their first wildcard early. No one's really going to save it probably until like game week 14, 15, etc. They're going to use it between maybe game weeks 5 and 8, especially if something major happens, like we've got our structure really wrong, we've got the wrong premiums, the wrong cheap players. There are going to be a lot of wildcards used early. So I wouldn't stress too much about exactly what your formation is. And the core of your team is likely to be similar no matter what. So it's like I said in my early squad building video, if you got a bunch of picks you really like, so maybe it's Trent, maybe it's Haaland, maybe it's Kane, maybe it's Jesus, maybe it's Perisic, whatever goalkeeper you're going for, put them in your team and then start building backwards. That will likely dictate what your formation is. So for example, if you've got 2 spots left, 1 defender, 1 midfielder, one can be 5.5 million, the other one has to be 4.5. Your choice on whether you spend the 5.5 in defence or midfield will then probably dictate exactly what your formation is. So I always like to kind of work backwards instead of worrying exactly what it's going to look like from the start. Players with higher minutes expectations, so you're thinking of the likes of Harry Kane and Son that start every game, they always get pretty good minutes. The more of those type of players you've got, potentially the less need for a bench. So if you've got like Trent and Cancelo and Reece James and Ben Chilwell, we're expecting them to get a lot of minutes. So as long as, Salah, Kane, whoever it is, you might not need as many options on your bench. And again, that might dictate the type of formation you can go for. Maybe you are better off then going for a kind of 4 or 5 at the back formation. A decent bench can provide some added flexibility and interchangeable formations. I feel like that was a lot harder to say than it should have been. So if you have got a couple of 4.5s on the bench, like defenders, you can play them. If your attacker has got a bad fixture, you could bench them and put your 4.5 million defender in instead. And suddenly you have got a different formation, which is why at the surface of it, there isn't really a best. It's more how your squad looks every week. If it needs to be a 5 at the back one week and then a 4 at the back another week, and then even a 3 at the back in game week 3 or 4, that's perfectly fine. And just to quickly end this little bit, 3-4-3 has always been the most popular formation, I would say, especially at the start of the season. But I think times might be changing this year. So let's take a look at a few drafts. So this is what I would say like a classic 3-4-3 formation is. Don't worry too much about specific players. We're really talking more about structure and strategy and stuff like that. So you've got your cheap goalkeeper, you've got your 3 pretty decent defenders. They're still kind of classed as premium ones in this case. You've got Salah and Mason Mount in midfield, so good options. You have then got a couple of cheapy options in Sinisterra and Neto. Then up front, very popular Haaland and Jesus, with Johnson, who's obviously a newly promoted striker, in there because he's nice and cheap at 6 million. So you do get those 2 4.5 million defenders on the bench, which can be useful. So if Mason Mount, for example, gets a very minor injury, he really is just going to be out for one game, then he's going to be straight back in, good fixtures, then you can bench him for 1 week for Tomiyasu and Johnny. It also limits the amount of 4.5 million midfielders and forwards you have to have as well, who are likely just going to be no good to you whatsoever. So in a future week, let's say it's not even an injury, let's say that Sinisterra or Johnson have got a bad fixture, or like Neto in game week 3, for example, against Spurs, you can bench them and play one of the 2 defenders. You could even play both if you had to. That's where the kind of flexibility comes in. So that's kind of the good thing about the 3-4-3, right? You get those 2 4.5 million defenders, less deadwood on your bench. You can interchange them for injuries or just rotation for fixtures. Still got your 2 solid captain options. You still got really good defenders. The only issue is you probably limit yourself to another kind of 7 to 8 million pound player. So either another 8 million pound midfielder, or you could have like Cancelo or Robertson in defence. So that's the only thing to look at. But the formation is flexible, and that is why I always say, don't get too hung up on exactly what the formation is. If one of your bench players is a better option in any particular week, you should be okay with benching one of your first 11 as well, if that's the way you want to set up. So you could even get to the point where you're playing, like I said, a 5 at the back. You're benching Sinisterra and Johnson, but if you need someone to come on, they're there. And I wouldn't take for granted having at least one bench player, because if, again, going back to that injury example, let's say Mason Mount does get injured for 1 week and you've got no bench whatsoever, then you're either forced into a transfer for a player that ideally you want to keep, or you got to make a transfer for one of your bench, which probably isn't ideal, because if you've got 4.5 million mids and forwards on there, who realistically you're going to change to anyway, or you have to play with 10 men, which just isn't ideal at all. So that's one thing about having at least one bench option. You don't necessarily need 2, but having at least 1 will give you a little bit of flexibility. But again, not getting too stressed about exactly what the formation is. If you did want an extra kind of 7 to 8 million pound player in here, it's quite easy to just downgrade like one of your forwards to a 4.5. That will give you 1.5 million extra to spend, and then one of the 4.5 defenders, Johnny or Tomiyasu, could just then be put up to whoever, right? It could be put up to a 6 million pound player, it could be Perisic. You could even just spend that money on, say, Chilwell to Cancelo. So if I just put Cancelo in for now, and then you got 0.5 million to spend if you wanted to. So you could upgrade Johnny, you could upgrade Neto or Sinistera, whoever it is, Sinistera, sorry. But either way, you can just do that. Then suddenly you've got Cancelo in there. And you just play one of these defenders every week. So suddenly you've switched from a 3-4-3 to a 4-4-2. But the only slight difference is you've got that better defender in Cancelo, and you just have to play one of the 4.5s every week, but you've still got a bench option. So don't get too hung up on the exact formation. The 3-4-3 is a classic, and there are lots of advantages to it, but this year in particular, I'm not quite sure it's going to work for a lot of people. So let's take a look at a 5 at the back formation, which is what I think a lot of people are looking at this season. Now, straight away, I look at those defenders and I think if they're all fit, if they're all starting the season, they're getting good minutes, they're all going to score a lot of points, right? I don't think, even if Chelsea move to a 4 at the back or whatever, I think James and Chilwell are going to be fine. And I would expect all those defenders over a good period of time, not necessarily over the span of 1 or 2 game weeks, because anything can happen in football, but to outscore most of the comparable attackers for a similar price. And like I said at the start, you don't want to get too kind of caught up on the exact formation, because a lot of these players have been in both this draft and the 3-4-3. So Trent was there, Chelsea defender, Salah, Neto, Mount, Jesus, Haaland. The whole attack was in there. It's just a few different players that kind of move around. The few things that I would say about this formation, right? And there is a positive at the end, but there's no ideal options off the bench. If you go back to that Mason Mount 1 game injury scenario I talked about earlier, well, suddenly you've either got to bring on one of your bench options, so De Silva, Andreas Pereira or Greenwood. None of them are likely to get you a huge amount of points. And again, you might say that because you've got such a good first 11, that odd game week where you might get that one injury is not that big of a deal. And that is fair enough, right? You could just play one of those bench options, but it's not as good as having a 4.5 million defender on there. And that could force you into a transfer that you don't really want to make. There's lots of value in defence, but funds are spread out a little bit more, which I'll come on to in just a second. The positive is that premium defenders, like I said, are more likely to be known quantities. I do think because of the way FPL have priced this year, there's a lot of players in the kind of 6.5 and below bracket in attack that we can't be like 100% sure are going to be good. There will be some good ones there. I just think it's harder to predict at the start of the season. Whereas defenders, it's a lot easier to predict their points potential, right? Because we know what they're all about. We know a lot of them are kind of nailed on. They should get good minutes. They're in good teams as well, right? They're all those defenders I just showed you are playing for Man City, Liverpool, Spurs and Chelsea. So they should be decent for points. The same might not be said for a lot of the other players. So that's one thing to think about. The only thing about 5 in the back, and I've talked about this in previous seasons, is the funds are a little bit more spread out. So in that previous scenario with the 3-4-3, if you started in that formation, it's just 2 moves to move to like an £8 million midfielder, like an additional one, right? You do that Johnson downgrade up front, and then you do that Sinistera upgrade in midfield. With this, you'd probably have to be forced into selling Cancelo and probably one of your other defenders. So let's say you wanted to go from Andreas Pereira up to another 8 million. We'll just put in Saka for now. Then you've got to make up 3.5 million. So you could sell Cancelo, but you can't even sell him to a £4 million defender because there's no 3.5s. You haven't got 4 million to spend. So you're kind of forced, even if you went down to 4 million in defenders. We'll just why does it always reset the price? Does my head in. We'll just put anyone in for now. We'll put Tanganga in. You've still got to make an additional transfer. So not only do you have to get rid of Cancelo, who you might not want to get rid of, you then got to sell another defender or another attacker just to get that extra £8 million midfielder in there. And I know that's like a big what if scenario, right? If you're happy with your defence and you don't want to change it, you're almost telling yourself straight away, I'm happy with only one £8 million midfielder. But if one starts taking off and doing really well, I do think 5 at the back leaves you a little bit less flexible than it maybe does for a 3-4-3. But again, if you think the value is there in the 5 at the back, that's just something you have to sacrifice. Like at the end of the day, when you make squads in game week 1 with £100 million budget, when player prices, you haven't made any money or anything like that, you do have to make sacrifices. And someone with a 5 at the back formation could turn around and argue with me that I just wouldn't change the defence. I'd sell Haaland or Salah, or I would just switch Mason Mount to that other £8 million midfielder I need. And that is fair enough. But I just wanted to give you some of the pros and cons to when you go for a kind of bigger at the back formation. So let me know below what kind of formations you're looking at currently. I do wonder, for those of you that want two £8 million midfielders, is whether 4-4-2 is the compromise. You could go from Jesus to a third £8 million midfielder as well if you wanted to, and play 4-5-1, which I don't think is too bad if you've got a 4.5 million defender on the bench. But the two 4.5 million forwards will almost certainly be duds and no good to you at all. But I think one bench option, which is what 4 at the back gives you, is probably a decent option for the start of the season. I'm actually going to be going through my updated draft in a few days, so I'm going to have a play around and see what kind of thing I can come up with. But I do like the idea of having at least one bench option to come on if you need them, to be a bit flexible with formation, rotation, fixtures, and obviously minor injuries as well. But this is kind of what I came up with. If you want a few premium defenders, you want two £8 million midfielders, you also want Salah and Haaland and Jesus in there. I think this is about the best I can probably come up with. And obviously when Tomiyasu isn't playing, you've also got Dunk to come on. Not ideal for game week 1 against Man United away, but Brighton do have a good few decent enough fixtures early on. So that's my 4-4-2 compromise. Maybe the 3-4-3 is dead this year. Let me know in the comments below. Or are you just going to stick to 5 at the back, which is extremely popular early on? If you found this video useful, if you've enjoyed it, please do give it a like. Keep hitting that subscribe button if you're new around here as well. And I'll be back tomorrow with another video.